Moved.
Is that Marty?
Second.
And Joyce, second. Great. Any changes? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, 7-0, right? We're seven, right? Everybody's here? Okay, great.
Yep.
And then appointment of the acting clerk, I move that we appoint Judy to be the acting clerk.
Second.
Second by Kevin, what's your name?
Yeah, Kevin.
Still Kevin. Okay, still Kevin. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? 7-0. So just quickly, for anybody who may be watching, right, this is a board workshop in public. It is something, though, for the board, so it's not a time and place where we take questions and answers. We will be working through several different topics that are on our agenda. However, we do have the public business meeting coming up, which is also a business meeting in public, but we have time allotted every month for the public to make comments. In this new situation or new circumstances for now, we want to still provide the means for people to be able to make comments, and there's a couple ways that you can go about that. You can sign up in advance, and a link will be provided to join the meeting live where you can make your comments. And you can do that by emailing at the address superintendent@fairport.org. Or you can just go ahead and, at that same email address, send those comments in directly, and we will receive them. And if appropriate, we will make responses at that time or make note of responses that need to be prepared and get back to people. But either way, either sign up in advance. If you want to make comments live, then use the email superintendent@fairport.org, or just go ahead and email that comment there, and we'll make note of it. Other than that, then let's move on with the agenda, since we're already pushing our time frame a little bit. 3 items, right? The first one was open retirement. We don't have for tonight, any type of resolution to open that up. I think if we pass that, it will be at our board meeting next week, which we can backdate if everybody's comfortable. I think we were before, right? Just confirming then, it won't be an official till we vote on it next week, but to open up the retirement period until now April 30th, to include the typical incentive that's associated with February 15th?
The February date. Yeah.
The February date that's in the contracts. So nobody opposed to that? That's not an official decision, by the way, but looks like we're going to open up for anybody who may be paying attention or want to know, then that we'll backdate it so that it includes all this week and through the end of April.
My only question would be, if we do that next Tuesday, people then only have a week to decide.
Monday, we decided that it would be Monday, the 4th. So.
Oh, okay, I thought you said April 30th,
I
sorry.
did, but we had mentioned that, right, to go through Monday the 4th, give everybody over the weekend.
Okay,
Something.
So it'd be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
right. That's better.
Does that sound good? Okay. So I'll plan, we'll get language for our business meeting next week. So that wasn't 10 minutes. Look, we're already ahead, except we're not. Do we want to do disposition of district properties at all? Talk about that, and then for the meteor stuff, since we're.
Sure.
Does that sound okay? Just quickly rearrange without.
Yep.
The agenda. You had an update for us on that, or is that?
So that was a greater conversation that we were having. You know, there are a number of properties that are tied to our district, and part of our district strategic initiatives of taking a look at all of our properties, analyzing them, and see if there's viability in keeping them. And that included, you know, again, we've had conversations about what we're doing with Minerva DeLand and how we plan on taking those 9th graders and bringing them over to the high school. And as we move along in that process, you know, what are ways that we can repurpose Minerva DeLand and use it as a resource that could continue to be used, but also consolidating the high school and Minerva DeLand. The second property was a White Brook property that we are interested in understanding our best options moving forward with that property. The other property would be the district office on Fairport Road. That's where central office administrators are looking at options of either selling or leasing that property. There's Balmer Place. What could be used, how could we use Balmer Place to either to keep it or to continue to use it as a way to support programming or storage opportunities. And then finally, there's been conversation about there's 22 acres next to Northside, and I think it runs parallel to Whitney Road that we want to understand more about what we could do with that property. And we also realize that any property that we either sell or lease, there's lots of SED regulations and legal requirements that we need to fulfill. We also recognize that there might be one-shot deals to where we could fund a reserve or pay down debt, et cetera.
And being generic at this point, I think everybody recognizes, right, but for anybody watching, is because the sensitive nature of real estate allows us to discuss greater details in executive session, and so if there are specific questions to any of those properties, I mean, it's nothing like a big challenge for us, right, to perhaps increase the importance of the value of those properties as ways to potentially find sources to continue to support schools through, a downturn in the economy. So that's why we want to bring that up, I suppose, overall, but those things don't happen necessarily overnight either. Questions, other comments about that? Okay, you guys are kind of a quiet group. This is weird.
We might just get there.
So, a report out for the other part, right, from the Audit and Finance Committee, as well as moving further along the budget process, because we know we're behind from the regular schedule, but we're on schedule based on the new voting periods, timeframes, or whatever. So, as you know, we did send out the notes and can open up for questions about that. And Tim, you're welcome to please jump in, but we sent those out. But want to discuss some of those recommendations that were being made in terms of, use of reserves, reallocation of some reserves that hadn't been touched in multiple years, and things along those lines. So again, I think if you had time, we sent those notes out. Brett has attached to the executive portion of board docs, if you're in there, his notes. They should line up. You always get my flavor, obviously, when I'm taking notes on my own, but I don't think they mismatch at all.
And it speaks to, last week, there was considerable conversation from a higher level perspective of the economic times that we're looking upon in the very near future. The governor has multiple lookbacks that will substantially impact budget. In the past, we've known it as gap elimination. We're anticipating that the gap elimination will be occurring just by the very fact of the revenues that are lost through our tax revenues that we get, our income tax revenues. There's a $10 to $15 billion deficit right now, and a large portion, or not a large, but a portion of our revenue comes from those taxes that we collect, and it's all based upon how the economy's doing. If people are buying, and the stock market's good, we reap the benefit of that through revenue sources. And but as we know, there are some really dramatic times on the horizon. There's projections of a looming recession, and coupled with the loss in revenue, there's projection of a loss in state aid, anywhere from $700,000 a year to $4 million. And we have a position, and I think that's what the essence of this conversation is, to talk a little bit about what the Audit and Finance Committee discussed. And Tim Sliz is on that committee, Peter is on that committee, and Kevin Glover is on that committee, and Matt, myself, we talked Friday, and we hashed some of those ideas out. And Peter, by all means, please, if you want to.
One of them was transportation, right? And I think you saw the notes. This morning, NISBA, I'm not sure if people had time to read through it, sent out, I think it cleared it up as good as mud, right? Is that what they say, clear as mud? So it's unknown, but there are two schools of thoughts, and you saw in our notes where our school of thought was we're not receiving any benefit from the services, therefore we're not paying. That's our recommendation out of Audit Finance. The other school of thought, though, from that NISBA summary from the legal side is the CARES Act may require, to receive money through the CARES Act, may require that you keep paying those types and sustain those contracts. That's the purpose of the stimulus, right? So that contracts keep getting paid for, people keep getting paid for their jobs, et cetera. But they didn't have an answer, right? And the governor has not provided an answer, and they're working even at federal to try and get an idea. So we don't have, it's still our recommendation for the time being that indeed we don't think it looks good to be paying for services for which you're not receiving. You know, if we get told otherwise, then we'll have to revisit that in terms of what comes down from the state. But that seems to be the two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I support that, Brett, just from my perspective.
Yeah, the webinar on Saturday left it very muddy. You know, that was discussed, but they did not tell us anything. It was a lot of maybe coulds, maybe we'll sees, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, the big piece of that, Joyce, is coupled with, yeah, sure, we pay it, but Matt, please jump in. Are we going to be able to get the associated aid? And those are other big questions that we're, you know, trying to weigh. So if we're forced to because of the CARES Act, and if that's what the act is telling us, hopefully that has the aid associated with it, or otherwise we have another option of using that and paying it forward to next year. So, Matt, did you want to speak to that? Or?
Yeah, I think that's the challenging part is, one, not knowing if we are allowed to pay. Two, if we continue that will actually drive expenses and then three, the other piece to keep in mind is if we're not paying it this year, then our transportation aid for next year needs to be adjusted for these expenses that we're not paying out this year. So just kind of the pieces to keep in mind.
Oh, that's a good point. I forgot. So if we're not actually paying that contract this year, we're not going to get aided on it next year.
Correct.
Okay, so
the hedge that, if we're not paying it this year, though, then we need to set all of the savings associated with that aside in a reserve to make up for the lost revenue, right? So we can make ourselves whole and probably actually come out a little ahead, but we need to be smart enough to set it aside, right, for that very purpose.
And again, there was an onboard document that was emailed to us this morning, and it basically said, we don't know. You know, it said
it was this big too. The document had all
right.
To say we don't know.
Is it lawful to pay bus contractors if they are not transporting kids? And the governor's legal team has not come to a conclusion on that. So nobody knows.
And understandably, and this is not a critique on what's happening downstate, and you know, they know that it's there. They're trying to get guidance on that question, and along with any other question that we've been waiting on.
So it makes it back to the original segment of this topic was talking about using for next year. I mean, I appreciated the description. It's hard to understand the allocation of the reserves for next year without fully understanding the budget implications that we're going to have, how much we're going to have to use from what reserve in particular.
So that's part of the game planning, and I think having a very productive meeting on Friday. It was a nice 2-hour conversation about all the different reserves that we have, the options that we have, the floors and the ceilings, and what are the best options that help us maintain, in as much as we can, equilibrium throughout the year without any polarizing gravitational impacts of a gap elimination. And again, we're preparing anywhere from $700,000 to 4.7. That's the range that we've been given and we're working under. And it's interpreted many different ways, but it leaves the budget director for the state lots of room relative to how we're doing as a state with revenues, how's the stock market's doing, what's the economy doing as a whole. So, you know, the better we're doing, the better opportunity that look back won't be so painful. However, the economic forecast is looming.
Right.
So the two reserves that are relatively, I don't want to say entirely unused because they are used, but they're of decent size and give us room to reallocate that we put in from the audit finance was from the employee liability reserve. Typically for those, to give you an idea, if they retire and they have, I don't want to exaggerate necessarily, but 100 days, vacation days, or sick days, it might not be used, something like that, vacation. This can help pay for that large chunk of one-time payout at retirement. But it's sizable, and so our recommendation is to take about 200,000 of that and reallocate it into a different reserve like our ERS or TRS. The second one was the insurance reserve. We used that rarely, but we did use it recently, right, in resolution to a lawsuit that had gone on for, a decade or so. But there was plenty there, and again, so not take it all. We definitely weren't saying put these reserves at a position where there's none. And if the gap elimination that happens, it goes multiple years, it gives us also room to reconsider those. So there was some of that. Combined, those are 600,000 in reallocations that, is a good chunk of money to be used to help prop up for next year.
I know on a retail level, there was a lot of the insurance companies, they were sending rebates to people because they weren't driving as much. I don't know, Matt, from a transportation perspective, was there any type of rebate from our insurance that we carry for the district?
Not this time, actually, because it's official talk about this. NYSER is essentially board members are all school district members. It's essentially a reciprocal itself. So there have been some initial conversations about whether there's any layup credit, so to speak, for buses, but other than that, nothing major.
Okay.
Typically in any given year, NYSER look at the premiums and work hard to keep premiums stable or minimal increase.
And I think some of that you're hearing from a retail standpoint was people who pay on a monthly basis. But anybody who's already paid this premium up front, like I'm not expecting to get a refund, even though I paid my premium back in October, I don't expect them to give me a refund on that.
I am getting a credit on mine. I pay the whole year at one time, and they told me they're giving me a 20% credit for April and May.
15% from Allstate, and I pay twice a year.
I was told that if I pay on a monthly basis, I could forego payments, but I pay once a year. So it all depends, I guess, on your carrier.
Yeah, they're all doing it differently, I guess, but it does seem interesting. That's a good question, Damon, because the buses aren't rolling, no one's in our building having accidents.
And we also have building and grounds vehicles too that aren't rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be a potential significant rebate, Matt. I don't know if you can reach out and ask if that's a plan, but that's it could be.
Yeah, we actually talked with John Abbott, who is the board representative on NYSER, so from East Oronokoi. So we had the conversations with the business officials, and NYSER's talked, had conversations, but weren't looking at any rebates as of now. Because again, it'll just likely long-term impact premiums, from a long-term standpoint with, their portfolio itself.
So you can be assured that as we move through this process and we understand where we can use credits or, find ways to create a savings, if you will, for the services that we're not using. Matt is working diligently. We're continually talking about that very piece, and we'll be sharing that with you as we move along. You'll know as soon as we find out, and we probably won't find out till June what those actual numbers are, end of June. So we know that those savings can offset any type of gap elimination, not completely, but can help offset it as we go forward. And
where are we currently, Matt and Brett, with bottom line, here's how much money we need to close?
Right now we're looking at about it was 2.3 on last week.
Mm-hmm.
Last week when we met, and we're continuing to get at that number.
We're still using that number as our target right now.
For now, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Brett, is there any, or Matt, is there any projection? I know that, if schools are virtual, there's, we've talked about before, there's money that we are saving because we're not, the buildings are, from a heat perspective or whatever, cost. Do we have any projection on what the savings are going to be this year that we can roll into next year?
Again, that's what I was just speaking to, and that's something that, Matt's probably chuckling to himself because every time that I'm calling him, we're talking about that very same thing to try to, it's a moving target. And, if you go in our buildings, it's kind of chilly right now, and, there's buses that we're not using, there's wear and tear, mechanical pieces that we are not paying into at this point in time, back to costs. So, there are line items that we are saving on, but I don't have an exact number, and I venture, I'm hesitant to guess or to put something out there.
Okay.
It's something that we're watching carefully, that we know that it's an important number because it's going to help us offset next year.
It'll be interesting, and when we get these next electric bills and the water bills, I'm sure they will be down.
You think so? I don't know if we're using more water with everybody at home or not, but.
But I mean, for the schools.
For the
school
schools.
district. Yeah, I mean, our electric bills will be very low
Yes.
compared to what they normally are.
Yeah.
And I assume supplies, there have to be supplies that we are using less of.
Although most supplies are paid for in the beginning of the school year.
So we have instituted a spending freeze, Judy, to that point. And again, we'll be able to understand what the effect of that was. But also remember when our students left in a moment's notice, there were packets of information, supplies
Sure.
that were, cobbled together. There's technology that we're cobbling together. We've lent out happily 500 computers, and there's things that we needed to again purchase. So again, it's a running tab, if you will.
And so
Plus, we had a lot of copying going on to get ready for the elementary students with the different packets that were necessary. So I'm sure there was a lot that was used then.
Great deal, yeah.
Yeah.
There were from the meeting a recommendation in the order to which we apply any of the savings statement that you're referring to whatever degree it is, and the longer it goes on, in some ways, the greater the savings will be, obviously, in fuel or, electric and water, whatever. So that was first to the ERS and then to the TRS. There are maxes, limits that Matt has pointed out on the ERS that we can put in there. But both of those reserves give us the greatest flexibility to manage the situation. So that's why our recommendation is to be placed into those two reserves first.
So understanding that the savings are going to be associated with the length of time of the closure, with the fact that the schools are now closed for the rest of the school year, does that have any implication to upstate, Brett, or?
No, and it's a moving target there too, and understandably, we're trying to be methodical. We can't go too far ahead of the governor. We saw what happened when there are mayors and county executives that are not aligned with the governor. He has the executive authority, and it's tied to state aid and state funding. We're working closely with Dr. Mendoza. I know Dr. Mendoza and County Executive Bello are working closely with our friends downstate to try to coordinate all that. So it's again, no levels of commitment. If you heard the governor speak today, we do need to get moving, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful, methodical way, that's based upon data, that doesn't give us another spike. We're really doing well with the social distancing, making sure that we're flattening that curve, but at the same time, we don't have assurances that we were at our apex, and there's that conversation that we're monitoring. We just met with superintendents today on a Zoom call as well. It is a moving, uncertain target, and I think that's the most frustrating thing, is because people want answers now. We know that there's lot in the balance, much in the balance, especially for our seniors and our juniors, and every grade level for that matter. So we know that we need to get a timeline out there, but we can't move faster than the governor.
And I heard on the news today that some of the Asian countries are seeing a second spike.
Too.
Yep, and on top of that, not to make this political, but another factor is that the president has said, well, the governors don't determine when the economy starts up. So again, I'm not trying to make this more complicated, but there are many different pieces we're weighing. So it's gonna be time, and I know people want to have information now, from what are we doing to grading and reporting, to what are we doing with end of the year fund balances, to if they do come back, how would we come back, who comes back, and how does that equate to free and appropriate education if we don't bring everybody back? I mean, so we're discussing a lot of different pieces. It's just uncertain, clear as mud. I think that's but we're working on it.
I know it's probably not really part of the agenda, but I do get several questions around graduation, right? I think seniors want a graduation of some sort.
I know Bob Clark and his team were working on a way to reach out to our seniors and their parents. We're going to ask them to take a thought exchange very soon, and then we're going to respond to that in a Facebook Live session on what we've learned and what are their concerns and interests as they close out the year and their time. And I know our juniors are very interested in knowing, because they have a lot on the line for college planning, and that starts now, if not last month or so. So that's coming forward. But again, it's all relative to what the powers that be decide as well.
So at this point, where are we in terms of where we find potential? So there's those reallocation of certain revenues or reserves, right? There's savings that we know we're going to have. We're just not sure to what degree yet, and so that does make budgeting a little bit challenging in terms of how much we can rely on any savings that happens. We have looking at district property as potential opportunity, but that's probably not going to happen. Well, definitely won't happen within time frame to apply it to a budget, but perhaps to put back into a reserve, right, to bring it back up to a level again where if it goes on an extra year, we'll have opportunities to get back at that. So it can support us in the second year of any elimination. And then we're to our area of, I think we put in the notes right around the tax levy. The limit that's in place, obviously the limit's there on the max end, and some of the reserves we talked about simply did a dollar for dollar exchange on the tax levy. It didn't really have any impact to us as a district that seemed to say, let's go ahead and use those reserves in that way then. That would have been, it's not technically a reserve, I suppose, right, Matt, but the debt service fund, bringing dollars back from that. So we looked at it, but that's, I think, our final sources were, right now, in all the projections, we're recommending we stay with what had been presented at the 2.13%.
So in our worst case scenario, this would have happened unto us, and I'm really pleased with how we're looking at our whole portfolio and trying to understand what we could do to offset any gap elimination. And I appreciate the great feedback and the communication and the recommendations, so we can apply it to producing a budget that keeps us solvent, that keeps us our operations running and our program running with high levels of integrity. So I appreciate the planning. It's making us look differently at the budget and helping us, make different decisions, not the ones that we intended, but we're very grateful for the support and guidance and insights.
And then to add to this, we really don't know if and or when a budget vote will be. That's still up in the air. Again, Saturday's video conference really didn't say much. Basically, we're still not sure about all of those, and that makes it more difficult for Matt and Brett to come to a more finalized budget, because our dates are not quite certain.
Right now, the budget is set. The budget date is June 9th, and we're working back from that date, understanding and realizing that could change, particularly as we are in this new level of normal. We just don't have a specific guidance at this time.
So Matt, I mean, given the budget vote right now is projected to be June 9th, does that have any potential impact on our ability to pay our bills once we roll around to July 1st?
No,
You're-
it's worse.
Worse?
Yeah.
All right, back to the computer, is that okay?
There you go.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of paying bills, no, as of now, in terms of the aid payments and taxes through June 30, we're projected to be okay there. It's still uncertain whether or not there'd be any holdback on a final aid payment, but I think overall, in terms of paying bills for the school year, we should be okay. And then rolling into next year, usually with the any assigned fund balance and fund balances and reserve assignments helps us get through the summer before taxes start coming in.
Okay, all right. And one of the question is as we're planning the budget for this coming year, I'm sure you are, but I just wanted to ask the question: are we looking out at the year after, just making sure we don't paint ourselves or put ourselves in a corner in terms of over or under this year? Not understanding the variables that could be a year out from now, but I just want to make sure we have plenty of flexibility and sustainability.
That's the whole piece of fiscal sustainability. It's not this year's budget or next year's budget. It's multiple
Right.
budgets down, and trying to really understand and position the use of our reserves and portfolio to help offset any type of gap elimination or looming economic conditions, because they're so variable right now. We just don't have. We do know that there's going to be a gap elimination most likely. We do know that there's going to be loss of revenues. We do know that small businesses to medium-sized businesses are going to be impacted. We do know that healthcare costs are going to be impacted. Stock market, that's no one has a crystal ball for that, but as that goes, so will a lot of some of our investments and some of our reserves and ERS and TRS, et cetera, will be impacted by those. So, yeah, we're doing a lot of that. Matt and I've been having lots of conversations about the long-term effects of this, not just next year, for certain.
And the state has 3 measurement periods out there in terms of the look back. So the first being April 30th, then June, and then not until December 31st for the final measurement period. So, those all fall into play depending on where the state's expenses revenues come in. We'll have to keep that in mind.
Matt, the final aid payment, there's only one left for this school year transferred from the state?
So we get an partial August payment as well for excess costs.
Is
So
that for
we-
this school year that comes in August?
Correct, yes.
So the look back periods of end of this month and end of June could potentially impact that, even though it's a different budget year for the state, right?
Right.
Okay. Size of those in terms of percentage of our overall aid from the state, what percentage do we normally get?
I might have, but they're smaller aid payments, so we received the bulk of our aid already.
Yeah.
The March payment is one of our biggest payments.
And that came in before
That
all
came
this
in.
happened, right? So there we go.
Yes.
These are challenging times, and definitely not the course that we were anticipating. And it's forcing us to reevaluate how we move forward and how we position ourselves fiscally, short and long term. So it's challenging, very challenging.
Other questions or comments around those notes and from the audit committee? Otherwise, we can move into executive session for some of the details that comes with that area. No?
I'm good.
Then a motion to move into executive session?
Moved.
Second by Damon. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, not seeing any hands. I think that's 7-0. You should have received a separate Zoom invite from Brett, so we need to leave this meeting and log back in. Okay?
Peter, before we, just a order of procedure here, how are we going to adjourn this meeting? Should it be adjourned in a public setting?
Oh, well, it probably should, but I don't think we want to have people just hanging out for the 2 minutes it takes us to come back into public session and adjourn totally. So Okay, is it good enough, you think, Tim, if we say we won't be making any decisions when we come out of executive session, we will move right to adjournment?
As long as it is stated, yes.
Yeah, so let's state that officially. We won't make any decisions and nor extend the meeting. We'll end with executive session and adjourn immediately.
Fine.
Very good. Thank you for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Talk to y'all soon.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, everybody.
They slide forward, I think. Mine does. There you go, yeah.
Be right back. I'm gonna use the restroom.
I guess we allow people to do those things.
Stay away from me while you do.
Yeah, I will turn a little bit the other direction so I don't have my back towards you.
Oh, that's quite all right. No, I couldn't get back into the session. That was the problem.